All right, so I'm going to put this right on the front of the recording for the benefit of the Tuesday class. And a lot of them try to listen to this one before class on Tuesday. But just a reminder, it was in your email on Sunday. We are delaying the class by 1 hour. So I've got time to make it back from an appointment without getting a speeding ticket or worse. No roadkill, right? But yeah, it'll just be delayed by 1 hour. And if for some reason I'm a little bit late logging on, I am on my way. I shouldn't be late though. If by delaying it an hour, that should take care of everything. But you never know. When you get out on the road today, you never know what you'll run into, right? It's just a risk leaving the house this time of year in Kentucky because road construction everywhere, and it's like pop-up dining. You never know where it's going to be tomorrow. So at any rate, I wanted to just put that reminder in there because some of you don't really read your invitations. You just kind of hit that little go to it fast button and that's fine. But I'd hate for you to sit there for an hour wondering where we were. Okay. And what I'm going to do is tonight, we're going to do the Torah portion, which is Vayera. And then tomorrow, we're going to do the Song of Songs. And I put together the Song of Songs lesson first. And then as I did the Torah portion, remember with our Torah portions, what we're trying to do, because it's a Shemitah year, we're trying to kind of go back over the last several years and pick up some things and kind of redo them. So if this sounds familiar, it hasn't been that long since we went over this lesson, but I want to take a little bit different angle with it. We did look at the resurrection in this Torah portion and the many clues. It's just not one clue in Vayera. There's clue after clue after clue after clue that this is speaking of resurrection. And so I think last week's lesson was a great warm-up because it helped us to raise our eyes and see what Avram saw, that he was already in the natural land. He didn't need to arise and walk if he's already there. He doesn't need to see something a level up if he can see it from where he is. And so that helped kind of get our feet off the ground in terms of learning to recognize prophecy in the Torah. And you don't have to say anything, but if you would, I can see a bunch of you tonight. You've got your video on, thank you. But raise your hand if you think since you started studying the Torah portions, you see way more prophecy in the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what studying the Torah portions does for you. You got it, you know? And once you start seeing it, then you can't stop seeing it. And that's what we're going for here. If we're not seeing the resurrection in every single Torah portion, we're doing it wrong. That's just it. We're doing it wrong because Yeshua loved explaining himself from the Torah. He absolutely loved it. Have you ever read the Gospels? This is how he talked about himself relative to the Torah. And now he's teaching us how to do that, which is absolutely wonderful that we're learning to understand him and explain him to other people the way that he understood himself and explained himself to other people. You know, I always wanted to do that because when we first kind of got into studying Torah, the challenge was out there. If Yeshua preached himself and if the apostles preached Yeshua from the Old Testament, then why can't you? I hadn't studied enough Torah yet, but I never forgot that challenge. And as the years went by, I realized now I'm beginning to get my feet up under me in terms of that challenge. Could I do what the apostles did? Could I preach the way that they did? Could I understand salvation and redemption the way that they did? And I don't I've not attained their level, but you know what? We're way closer than we were when we started. That's for sure. So give yourself a pat on the back. Good job. I kept walking. Even when I didn't understand everything I was doing, I kept walking. And that's what we're going to do. We're just going to keep walking and looking for life from the dead. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And I'll share the screen with you if I can find the little button. Where did you go? There you are. And neighbors with loud motorcycles, what are you going to do? Okay, Vayera. And if you can read the Hebrew in this, go ahead and take a gander. Of course, you've got the Vav consecutive right there. So you don't toss it out, but you kind of look past it. And you look for that Hebrew root, which in this case is going to be Yod, Resh, Aleph. And it's Yora, which is to see, to look. And it can mean just to literally look at something or see something. In this case, the way that it's used, it's a form of that, which means and appeared. So when someone appears, then you can see them. That's the connection there. So with Vayera, we will review what exactly does it mean to see something. And I'm going to call this Hebrew food. And I don't know if that's the right title, but I guess you can decide by the time we get to the end whether that's the right title or not. So let's move on here. I thought he looked very Abrahamic. I don't know. It's probably some modern dude. Okay. Let's look at Genesis 18, 1 through 8, and that's going to give us the context. It says, now the Lord appeared, and that word there is Vayera. So we know what the sharesh, we know what the root of that is. It's to see. So now the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre when he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. Where he's sitting is an important part of the narrative. Sometimes ask yourself as you're reading through a narrative in the Torah portion, if it's adding details that you don't necessarily need to know to understand what happened in the story. So if this seems like just a detail that's thrown in there, it probably isn't. It's probably a vital part of understanding the narrative. And in this case, where Abraham was positioned when he raised his eyes. It's where he is. He's in a state of expectation, which goes even beyond his hospitality, how he was known to sit at his tent door and wait for passersby to come by. He would be hospitable to them, feed them, and then make those souls like he made up in Haran. So it says, while he's sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day, we know he's still in the pain of circumcision at this point. It's thought that he was in his third day after circumcision. It says, when he raised his eyes and looked. Now, Vaisa, when he raises something up, remember this from last week. We're kind of layering things from last week. When you nasa your burden, it means that you're about to prophesy. And so we get that with Abraham when he raises his eyes, Vaisa. It's the same root there as nasa. He's about to raise his burden. He's about to experience prophecy. So when he raised his eyes and looked, Vayera, okay, we have the same sharesh here as the title of the Torah portion, where it's talking about seeing, ro'eh, ra'ah. So he looked, and behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. So not a random detail. You need to know that 3 men visited him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He bowed down to the arets. So he goes from where he's positioned at the tent door, and he goes to meet them. And then he bows to the ground, which it was kind of an oddity here. So he recognized right off the bat, since he had raised his eyes, he was seeing prophetically. And we're even told that the Lord appeared, right? Not just men. It says 3 men, but then it says the Lord appeared. So something special is going on, and Abraham recognizes it. So he doesn't, kind of stand up and take a leisurely route to welcome these 3 men. Instead, he runs when he's still in the pain of circumcision to meet them. And then he bows down to the ground. And he says, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and make yourselves comfortable under the tree." Okay, this is, again, it's not random information. It's not just a nice narrative detail. It's prophecy. So he invites them to rest under the tree. He says, "And I will bring a piece of bread so that you may refresh yourselves. After that, you may go on, since you have visited your servant." And they said, "So do as you have said." So right here, if you're like 99% of those who read the Torah, you're asking yourself, okay, at this point, I know they're angels. Possibly the identity of one of these is, a manifestation of Adonai himself. I suspect this is a pre-incarnation of Yeshua. And so they're saying, go ahead, make natural food for us. That's okay. That's an oddity. You wouldn't expect a spiritual being to have a human form or to eat a human food. Right? So we're learning about, again, the nature of angels, but we're also being drawn into how the natural realm, because remember, Abraham, he bows down to the arets, he bows down to the ground. But where he's positioned and what he sees is coming from another realm. These men are not just men, they're angels, and they're coming on a mission from the Most High. And so he's offering natural bread to these beings from a supernatural realm. So he says, "I'll bring a piece of bread so that you may refresh yourselves. After that, you may go on, since you have visited your servant." And they said, "So do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly." You get this idea. He's running quickly, hurry. He says, "Quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour." Okay, so we've got 3 men, 3 measures of fine flour under the tree. And we're going to look at what does the tree represent and what does it have to do with the number 3. He says, "Prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes." Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant. And he hurried to prepare it. There's another hurry word. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them. And he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. So repetition, you've done this long enough, your antennae are up. When you see a repetition of a phrase like this, under the tree, when you see so many uses of the shoresh that have to do with seeing, ra'ah, that gets your attention. So sometimes repetition, it's, again, how do I study the word? Look for repetition. And if you see repetition, follow up. Go back and do the word studies. And it can lead you to other contexts. All right, so what's going on with this tree? Isaiah 11, 1-2, if you've done workbook 1, if you understand why we call this the creation gospel, because it's the paradigm is the 7 spirits of Adonai. That menorah is iconic when you think of the creation gospel. because this is really our working text. It says, then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, or Yishai, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. Right? So it's associating the Spirit of the Lord with a tree. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on it. The spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and strength, the spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. So one of these spirits specifically is connected to the tree, and that's the spirit of counsel. The spirit of counsel in Hebrew is etzah. Of course, your spirit words in Hebrew are feminine, like chokhmah is wisdom, binah is understanding, etzah is counsel, gvura is strength, da'at, that's got the feminine ending with the tav, that's knowledge. And then yorat, Adonai, you still hear that feminine ending with the tav. So your spirit words will have a feminine form in Hebrew. So etzah is counsel, and etz is tree. And as you're counting on that menorah, what you have to do is you have to place the Spirit of the Lord in the middle of the 7-branch menorah, because it is the Spirit of the Lord he's talking about. And then he goes back and he lists specific manifestations of the Spirit of the Lord. So your first would be wisdom, your second understanding, your third counsel. Then you would skip over to the other side of the menorah. It would actually be in the 5th position at that point. You've got the spirit of strength, then the spirit of knowledge, and then finally the fear of Adonai, which corresponds to Shabbat. And so because it's the third in order, we've got another clue. He's talking about the tree, the eitz. Well, what Abraham is about to receive is etzah. He's about to receive counsel. And I know we all think that counsel is giving everybody advice, and we tend to do more of it than we probably should. However, counsel begins with receiving the word. That's the spirit of counsel. How are you going to counsel the word if you don't receive the word? And you have to receive it in a very specific way. We are told to meekly receive the engrafted word of God. And so when you're looking around and say, well, how will I know the spirit of counsel? Well, if you will meekly receive the engrafted word through the spirit of counsel, then the seed can sprout, and then you will start to bear fruit. And then you might be fit for somebody to receive your counsel, because then you're bearing fruit consistent with the tree. It's a lot more trustworthy that way. So the recurring number in the text, whether we're looking through the literal number 3, or whether we're looking at a symbol such as the tree. Remember, on day 3 of creation, that's when the trees were created. They were created, the etzim were created with the spirit of etzah, the spirit of counsel. So if trees are prophecies of people and they are metaphors of people in scripture, remember, I see men like trees walking. Remember, trees have a whole conversation in the writings. We're called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord. So even before there was a human being, there was a prophecy of a human being on day 3. Even though a human being's not here until day 6, on day 3 is a tree. And the tree prophesies to the righteous human being, and also the unrighteous human being, because those are the ones that are cut down for war. So the tree represents the number 3 and the spirit of counsel, or etzah. And we know 3 is usually associated with resurrection. Resurrection occurs on day 3. So how does the resurrection occur? It can occur with the spirit of Etzah, working in a very specific way, sprouting up out of what looked like was dead, which is kind of the way that back here in Isaiah 11:1, where it talks about a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, a branch from his roots will bear fruit. In other words, coming from the hidden place, you will begin to see the stem and the fruit from those hidden roots. That's kind of the idea. He creates light on day one of creation. And then it says he stores light like seed for the righteous. And so he hides that light away and he saves it for the righteous. And then we get that prophecy of righteous human beings on day 3. So the seeds, and it's very specific on day 3 when it describes the trees, it always says bearing fruit with seed in them. And that's repetitious. So that makes you pay attention. It's not just a tree, but it's bearing a seed that will reproduce after its kind. So on Resurrection Day, on the 3rd day of creation, the idea is that when righteous human beings resurrect, that they will resurrect according to the seed. And we know the seed is the word. We know Yeshua is the seed. We know Yeshua is the word. So they will bear fruit according to the seed of the word Yeshua. They will bear true to their kind. We also know the hope is in the seed. The hope of resurrection is in the seed. The seed is the word, and the fruit of the word is in the tree of life. So when the text gives us this unnecessary detail, which is actually necessary, we find out that both the angels and Abraham were under the tree. And so we have to ask ourselves, if this is prophecy, what tree were they sitting under? And what tree was Abraham standing under? If this is prophecy, what's really happening? So, and appeared to him, I went ahead and pasted in the definition of the shoresh of the root ra'ah for to see or to appear. So you could look and just kind of take a gander, kind of glance through there and look at other definitions for ra'ah or other uses. But a little bit of trivia here. It's thought that Abraham was the 3rd day after his circumcision. And it is very traditional to visit a sick person on the 3rd day. And it's thought that this visit occurred in the month of Nisan at approximately the time of Pesach, because as the angels continue on to Sodom, Lot makes matzah for them. He seems to have some grasp of the season. Lot seems to have a grasp of a lot of things. He just doesn't seem to have a huge commitment or conviction about it. So just looking through here to see, to appear, to advise yourself, kind of goes back to the spirit of counsel, meekly receive the engrafted word, to behold something, consider something, discern something, experience something, take heed of something. All of these are legitimate translations into English of what it means to see. But again, and it's included in the definition, it can also describe having a vision, being able to see into a spiritual realm. And this is kind of just a review of what we had last week. But I wanted you to see the Hebrew text. So I copied and pasted it in there. And then I put arrows in there so that you could see, I keep saying see, and then I think ra'ah, where it says here, Vayera, when he lifted up his eyes and looked. That way you can not only just see like Vayisa is the lifting of the burden of prophecy, you can see the use of the Shoresh, Yara, and you can see how it's doubled here. You can see Vayera, and then you can see Vayera, the two purple arrows, if you can't read the Hebrew. And so he lifted his eyes and looked, and he's using here also hine, which is emphasis, like, behold, I see it. Three men standing opposite, and when he saw, see, he looked and then he saw. See the progression there. There's no unnecessary words here. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, three men were standing opposite. And when he saw, all right, there's an extra level of recognition here. He's preparing to see something beyond the natural realm. And then he discerns what he's seeing. He begins to understand. How many of you have had a dream that you knew was more than a dream, or maybe a night vision that you knew was more than what you ate for supper, or that pepperoni? You knew there was something to it. And then at some point, you perceived what it was. He gave you an understanding of what you saw. This is kind of what's happening. He's in preparation. He lifts up and prepares to see something in the prophetic realm, something beyond the purely physical realm that I was sure he's experienced the pain of circumcision. And so once he lifts his eyes and prepares to see, then he understands what he's seeing, and that causes him to run from that tent door to meet them and then to bow to the earth. So a lot of times, if you get those troubling visions or dreams or whatever, it's nothing to trouble you, but it might be trying to get your attention to say, okay, keep your eyes up, keep your eyes open, and be ready for something that may not fit into any logical understanding. Instead, it's going to be the spirit of understanding, which is the second spirit. And then that's going to lead to counsel, the third spirit. You'll have a resurrection of your understanding. It'll start to bear fruit. In other words, it can advance. It can perform the function of what that dream or vision was supposed to do for you. And it could be even an experience, because we're told to, remember, we might be entertaining angels unaware. Maybe we didn't lift our eyes. However, if we were practicing the grace and the hospitality of the word, then maybe even without comprehending or understanding at the time, we did a good deed. And then maybe later he might bring us to understanding and counsel concerning that deed. And in that way, you don't necessarily have to have a total awareness of what you're doing. You just have to have a faithfulness in what you're doing. Again, so I think we've already said that. I wanted to go back to the tent, or the ohel. Remember, the tent of meeting is the ohel moed. Well, Abraham is at the doorway, or the entrance of his ohel. And using this verb of prophecy, ra'ah, we can see him begin to open his spiritual eyes. We can see him understand then what he's seeing, truly preparing himself to receive the message that they have for him. And then when he perceives that, yes, this is a prophetic encounter, this is a visitation, then he runs and he bows to the land. And so the idea is Abraham's sitting at a tent door. And in scripture, even a human being is likened to a tent. And being at the door, or being at the opening, a couple of different words there you might recognize if you like to go over it in Hebrew. A door, of course, is dalet, like you would see in the book of Revelation. Yeshua was standing at the dalet. an opening, patach. That's just an opening. It doesn't have to be like an open and closed door. It can just be an opening, like a patach. And if you studied your beginning Hebrew, then you know that patach is also one of the little vowelization marks, which basically it means open up, open up and say it, open your mouth up. But by being at the doorway to his tent, Abraham is positioned to see these men for what or who they are. And this is the thing about Abraham. He always seems to know where to pitch his tent. Made a mistake here and there, but for the most part, Abraham knows where to pitch his tent. And he knows where to build his altars. And these tent camps and these altar buildings have to do with some aspect of resurrection, of Israel reconnecting, Israel that's still in his loins at this point, just a promise. But he's making these altars at places where there's an opening. There's some divine connection into something just above, something that he has to lift his eyes and see. But Abraham has this special ability to be able to do this over and over and over. Remember, when he and Isaac get to Mount Moriah, he's going to lift up his eyes again. And then he's going to lift up his eyes again, and he's going to see the ram stuck in the thicket. Look how many times we read about Abraham being able to lift his eyes and see more than what is physically there. And, 2 Corinthians 4:3-7, it says, even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Really makes us think about why it says the Lord appeared and what that manifestation of himself might have been. Was it pre-incarnate Yeshua? We're not told specifically, but it is a great mystery. Tradition tells us that it was 3 angels, and even gives us the names of the 3 angels. Whoever it is, we know that the text says Yod He Vav He appeared to Abraham in this instance. How that looked, I don't know, but apparently you have to be able to raise your eyes in order to see it, because that's what Abraham did. And so he says, we don't preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus is Lord, and ourselves as your bondservants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, light shall shine out of darkness, is the one who is shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. In other words, we're not going to resurrect ourselves. But he's pushing a lot of ideas in here from the Torah portion. Sometimes you can read Paul and almost tell which Torah portion he's teaching from. But here he's talking about how Abraham is able to see something that the average person can't see. He's able to not just lift his eyes, he's able to understand what he's seeing. But he says for the unbelieving, they're never going to see that. Their minds are blinded. You can't get understanding if your mind is blinded. And part of that apparently is because this great treasure is concealed in earthen vessels. In another place, it'll say tents. That the tent itself, it's hovering between 2 realms. For those who are blind, it can only be a natural thing. But for those who are like Abraham, they understand what it means to be a human being, and it does not prevent them from being able to lift their eyes and experience the supernatural. You have to be able to do that to anticipate the resurrection. 2 Corinthians 4:13-18. He says, but having the same spirit as faith, according to what is written, I believed, therefore I spoke. All right. This is where Abraham is. He understands. And so he begins having this conversation with the angels. He's like, please sit down. Let's wash your feet. Let's get you something to eat. Had he not believed in their mission, he would not have spoke up. They would have just passed by. So he says, we also believe, therefore we also speak, knowing that he who raised our Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and will present us with you. Paul is connecting this with the resurrection. Whatever Abraham saw and whatever Abraham understood, just like we were saying last week, he understood it had something to do with the resurrection. He says, therefore, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. Believing that is what makes us believers. That Yeshua has the resurrection power, that the word has the resurrection power. No matter what the tent looks like, no matter what the outer man looks like, no matter what kind of pain Abraham was in, he believed that there would be a resurrection. He understood it because this circumcision is a sign for him of being renewed day by day. There's resurrection day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And here's the clicker. With Abraham, it clicks us right back to our Torah portion. It says, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And this is where we get what Abraham saw. And then he understood it. He saw it, and then he understood it. That this angel is promising life to Sarah at Passover the following year, which is going to be Isaac, a type of Messiah. Abraham saw that and he understood it. Sometimes I think we reduce Abraham to this kind of blundering guy. He blunders out of Ur, he blunders into 10 tests, and he's got a good heart, so he just accidentally, gains God's favor. We almost make him into a little bit goofy. He's not goofy. Listen to what it's saying about this guy. He saw more than the average believer today sees over and over. See, if we believed and understood, then it would change our behavior more than it does. And I got my finger pointed at me on that. 2 Corinthians 5:1-5. It says, for we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, trying to move where I can read it, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house, in this tent, we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven, inasmuch as we, having put it on, will not be found naked. For indeed, while we are in this tent, we groan, being burdened, because we do not want to be unclothed, but to be clothed, so that what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. Now, he who prepared us for this very purpose is God, who gave to us the Spirit as a pledge. All right, so in the case of our Torah portion, one specific manifestation of the Spirit that is working is definitely going to be the spirit of Etzah, the spirit of counsel, a resurrection spirit. And by the way, if you've read 50,000 Degrees and Cloudy, then you already know this. But the understanding is when a righteous soul crosses over, the body will go ahead and decay, like Paul is saying here, but the soul itself will be taken into Abraham's bosom. It'll be stored under the altar. and it will be given a type of garment, which is exactly what it says in Revelation, where these souls crying out, they're given a garment and told to rest a little while, just rest a little while. And so the idea, as you're waiting for this resurrection, is the righteous are not found naked. Because see, if they were naked, then they would be where the rich man was, not where Lazarus was. He was found naked in that place. There was no garment given to him. He was not gathered into Abraham's bosom. He could see it, but there was a great gulf between them. And so a soul awaiting the resurrection has this temporary garment of glory to take the place of his body. But what we really long for is the resurrection of the body, which is going to be a superior thing to simply having this temporary garment while we await for the resurrection from the dead. Okay, so last week's Torah portion, we saw where Abraham arose. He walked the promised land above. And Abraham, as he addresses these angels, he's using some pretty specific language here. Again, it's repetition of avar, the Hebrew root avar, which means to pass over or to cross. So this is where Abraham gets this identity as a Hebrew or an Ivri. He's one who has passed over. He's one who has crossed over. In last week's Torah portion, he crosses into the promised land. He raises his eyes and he's told to arise and walk. And he says, okay, Abraham, I'm going to give your descendants this inheritance. I'm going to restore them back to the garden with resurrection. And avar in Hebrew, where we get Hebrew or Ivri, it's kind of an equivalent expression to pasoch. And from there we get pesach, because with pasoch, it's more of a hopping motion, like a bird hopping from branch to branch. So they're kind of close in terms of what they mean, and perhaps not a coincidence that Pesach falls in the beginning of the months. It reminds us what it means to be a Hebrew, somebody who's crossed over, somebody who will experience salvation and resurrection from the dead. And you see this kind of, you see how the Father, when he follows up on something, because in this Torah portion, Abraham feeds 3 angels. Centuries later, his descendants, hundreds of thousands of descendants, are going to be fed the food of angels every single day. They're getting Hebrew food. They're getting manna from heaven. They're getting Yeshua from heaven. He says, I am the bread of heaven. And so this is kind of what a Hebrew eats. If you are one who crosses over, if you are one who has this sight and understanding of resurrection like your father Abraham, then he will feed you the food of angels. He will feed you the word of God. And so you can see where Abraham is sowing a piece of bread. He says, I'll bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And then he says, after that, ta'aru, again, that's avar, from where we get ivri. He says, you can cross over, because he says, since you have visited your servant, that's an intensive avartem. Ta'aru, avartem. It's the same Hebrew root, avar. So he's doubling down here. He's saying, you can pass on since you have passed over me. It's, again, embedding in us, what does it mean to be a Hebrew? It means to have a greater understanding and interaction with that heavenly realm. The more we eat Hebrew food, then the more we identify with that realm and what it means to be a Hebrew. here's the traditional understanding of who these three were. I tend to think that one of them was pre-incarnate Yeshua. I could be wrong. Don't write that down. Just the clues I'm getting. And that's a different lesson. But the idea here is that, and we've discussed this before, angels are very single purpose. They have one mission and they do it. And so one of these is bringing tidings to Sarah of life at an appointed time, the same time next year. Her womb is going to be resurrected. I'm going to posit tonight that possibly it was more than her womb that was resurrected. And then he's going to prophesy that Isaac will be born at this time next year, which is thought to be Passover. Then you've got two angels who continue on. One angel drops out of the picture, and then two go on. It's thought that one of those healed Abraham and rescued Lot. And so it seems that his job is more interactive with human beings. And then the third one destroys Sodom, Gomorrah. I think it was 5 cities. I'd have to go back and check. But they believe that was Gabriel because he's got the idea of strength, and he's sometimes seen as a powerful warrior angel. At any rate, what I wanted to point out in Genesis 18:8 is that Abraham fed these angels with human food. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared. We know that he gave them bread and placed it before him. And he was standing under the tree. Right? So again, it's a resurrection hint under the tree, the third day of creation. The day that the fruit trees would have budded with the seed in them, the ability to reproduce true to the seed. But it seems, again, that Abraham is connecting the natural realm and the spiritual realm. He's offering natural food, but he knows that the benefit is going to be more than natural. The benefit of this meal is going to be supernatural. So in Genesis 1:11, it says, God said, let the earth sprout vegetation and plants yielding seed and fruit trees on earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. And it was so. So the seed in the fruit is the emphasis of the third day, not just fruit, not just trees, not just seeds, but fruit trees bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. In other words, they're breeding true. When you think of a believer who has faith in the promised seed, Yeshua, what are they doing? They're producing fruit that is faithful and true to the kind of the seed that is in them, which is the seed of the word, Yeshua. But notice here the word haaretz, the earth. The earth. Well, this is where Abraham bows. It says he bowed himself to haaretz, to the earth. So the earth is a very natural thing. But we know because of his positioning, he's expecting something supernatural. He's prepared for that. He doesn't see his identity as in the tent or out of the tent. He sees his identity as both in the tent and out of the tent. And so he gets this prophecy of Isaac, a promised seed. He's going to be after Abraham's kind with a like seed in him. Isaac is going to reproduce true to his kind, which is Hebrew. Abraham is a Hebrew. Isaac is going to be a Hebrew because the seed of the word, the promise will be in him and he will reproduce true to his kind. So Abraham is both a man of earth and a man of heavenly vision. He's sitting at the tent door and he is prepared to have this vision of resurrection. he is prepared to receive this promise, this prophecy of a son to be born after him, bearing the same seed after his kind. And the angel even says, return. We're looking for doubles here in chapter 18, verse 10. Vayomer shuv ashuv. He says, I will surely return. Well, that word surely is not there. It's a intensive. Shuv means return. So he puts it in the present, Vayomer shuv, and then he puts it in the future, ashuv. Vayomer shuv ashuv. And so I will return, or he's saying, I return, I will return. He is prophesying two returns. And then he says, in the Rashi commentary, it says, what he's saying is, at this time next year, there will be life. And that's where you can see the green arrow there, chaya. There will be life. Return, I will return. There will be chaya. There will be life. And so Rashi is interpreting this for us, and he's saying what the angel is saying is, when I return next year, it's literally going to be like this time, living in the same way, Abraham, that you and Sarah are alive today, this time next year, or at that return, you will still be alive. And so if we think of that in terms of the two arrivals of Yeshua, he brought us life with this resurrection. And you know what? When he returns again, return, I will return, we will be alive like this time, living. And if he were to delay until we were dead, it would not matter. We would still be alive. Just like was told, it was prophesied to Abraham, even if you're dead, when I return, you're going to be alive. Rashi says, which will be living for you. That is, all of you will be sound and alive. And so this is how the Jewish sages are interpreting this. They're like, this is just blatant resurrection prophecy, that the children of Abraham, if they have reproduced according to his kind, if they have been eating their Hebrew food, then when he returns, they will be alive and sound, healed. Let's see. I might skip over this one right here for the sake of time. It's on the older version of this, which I think I might have uploaded to Facebook yesterday. And it's also in your private playlist. But there's more of these if you want to go through just the textual study. The idea, though, is that resurrection, you need to be able to see it and hear it. And so if I see it, hearing means obeying it. There are principles of resurrection we need to obey. Because if we obey these principles of resurrection, then we will live today the way we expect to be seen alive when he returns, which is basically what the angel said. Your living when I return will be just like today. As you are alive, you will be alive. And so if you are not living so well when he returns, it may be that you're not, it was because you weren't living so well. You weren't living in that Hebrew expectation. And so these messianic returns that he's prophesying, he's saying these are going to bring new life from the dead, even if we have dead skin covering our bodies. And the clue in this is what Sarah says at the tent opening. And Rashi points out, it's what she says in her inward parts, bakirba. when she laughs at the prophecy, it says that she laughed in her inward parts. Depends on your translation. The Hebrew is bakirba, but Rashi points out it's not in her inward parts, it's at her inward parts when she laughs. And it says, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure? My Lord being old also. I think Rabbi Lux pointed this out this week, that it's understood that both Sarah and Abraham had descended to a level where neither one of them could reproduce anymore. The text can imply that. I don't know if that's 100% true. I don't guess we'll know until Yeshua tells us. But I suspect that it might be. Because the translation of this, again, going back into the text, it says, after I have withered, or it's saying after I've become old. It says, after I have withered, beloti, shall I again have clear skin. That word is edna. All right. So Rashi there is saying this clear skin, or this edna, it's a luster of flesh, just based on a word study. And I've got down here where you could go read more about it. It's in Bava Metzia 87a. So they're looking at what Sarah says is much deeper than, sitting there giggling because, well, we're too old to do that anymore. It's much deeper than that. She's saying, I have withered skin, beloti, and you think I'm going to have clear skin? Or edna, what's up with the skin? Well, where she says beloti, it comes from bala. And bala means to fall away, or to fail. Of garments fallen away and torn by use and age. Paul even discussed this when he was talking to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapters 4 and 5. He talks about the tent wearing out. She's talking about her body. So she says, beloti, my body's worn out. It's just decayed. I'm not completely dead, but in this respect, yes, my body's dead. And then she says, am I going to have clear skin? It may have translated it as pleasure. Will I have pleasure? Well, this comes from adin. Edna comes from adin, and it means voluptuous or sensual one. So the commentary says, it kind of puts it back into the Hebrew. It says, after the skin had worn out, nitbala, and become full of wrinkles, the skin once again became soft, or nitaden, and her wrinkles smoothed out. And Sarah's beauty returned to its place. So that deeper Hebrew study, you get a better idea of why she's laughing. If you're my age, and you have to look at your face in the mirror every day when you wash it, and you see all these little wrinkly, gobbly neck things, and then you've got these little lines right here, and these lines right here, and then you got these muscles up here that turn into lines, and then you look at your hands and you say, good grief, I remember when I thought my mom was so old because her hands looked like that. That's what she's saying. My skin is worn out, nidbala. And so you're telling me that this old skin that I have to keep putting lotion on, it's going to become soft, nitaden? That has less to do with pleasure than it has to do with making it soft again. So what she's describing to us is a process of resurrection. She's saying, is my youthful beauty going to return? Certainly clears up why later, after this, Avimelech decides she's a hot chick and takes her into his harem. She's already telling us she's old and wrinkly, But Avimelech's like, she looks good. What happened to Sarah is the question. Ephesians 5:13 says, all things become visible when they're exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason, it says, awake, sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Right. So Sarah kind of hiding in her tent, laughing that her body could be resurrected. And he says, no, I'm going to expose that. He's saying, awake, Sarah, you sleeper, arise from the dead. Yeshua will shine on you. This word will resurrect you. Even in, where was this? Ephesians 5:25-31. This is kind of a husband and wife passage, but it says something really interesting. It says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. It's a type of immersion, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Which reminds us of Isaiah 51:2. It says, look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who gave birth to you in pain, when he was but one. I called him, then I blessed him and multiplied him. And if you put the promises side by side with Abraham and Sarah, they're almost identical. They're one. And so I think it's entirely possible that if Sarah experienced a resurrection from the dead, that Abraham did too. They were one flesh. And then we're reminded in Isaiah, they were one. So the implication here in Vayera is that this angelic visitation prophesied of at the exact moment it would have occurred. We're not told that. That's not written in the text. But we can guess that something extraordinary happened over the next 3 months, because it produces some type of pre-resurrection of their body, Abraham and Sarah. And as an example, think of Naaman. In 2 Kings 5:14, the prophet tells him to go immerse 7 times in the Jordan River. And when he finally does it, he comes up and it says his flesh is like a little child's. So Sarah's prophecy here is at least implying that both she and Abraham experienced a transformation of reproductive organs, maybe even of the whole body. It's talking about her skin. She would have been pretty good looking. If they did like Naaman, they have this washing of water by the word that Paul is talking about. And then all of a sudden, miraculously, sometime within that 3-month window, they both get young again. And so this is perhaps why the rabbis see a clue in where Sarah dies. Sarah goes to Hebron. Well, Abraham and Isaac, they're going to go to Mount Moriah to make that sacrifice. If Sarah has experienced this resurrection of her flesh to conceive Isaac at Hebron, remember they're at the Oaks of Mamre near Hebron, she knows something special about that place because Abraham specifically pitched his tent there. He specifically built an altar there for some reason. And so understanding the importance of that location, the spiritual importance of that location, said to be an entrance back to the garden, said to be where Adam and Eve were buried, she goes back to that place of resurrection while Abraham and Isaac go to Mount Moriah. And the rabbis say the reason she went there was to pray for Isaac, that she thought Abraham was misinterpreting the commandment. It got into semantics over what does it mean. The Olah, does it mean to lift him up and consecrate him? If he agrees to live that consecrated life, then you bring him back down. Abraham's hearing as, I need to take a knife to my son's throat. They say they're in a dispute. And so thinking Abraham is misunderstanding the commandment, she goes to Hebron, an entrance to the garden, a place that screams resurrection. And this is where she prays. And they say she literally prayed herself to death. Why would she go to Hebron unless she experienced some sort of pre-resurrection in that place? And so that really just kind of wraps up what I wanted to add to this from the last time we went over it. But I wanted you to notice how many times a youth or a na'ar is hanging around some scene of resurrection. Remember, Abraham and Isaac, they took 2 youths, young men. If we go back to Genesis 18:7, where it says Abraham gave the choice calf to his servant to prepare it, it's not a servant, it's Hana'ar, the youth. And Mark 16:5 and 6, as they go looking for Yeshua in the tomb, they see a young man sitting at the right wearing a white robe. They were amazed, and he said to them, don't be amazed. You're looking for Yeshua the Notzri, who has been crucified. He has risen. He's announcing resurrection. Abraham gives this calf to a youth to prepare it. He's about to receive a resurrection promise and prophecy. And it begins with a piece of bread, the offer of a piece of bread. And Rashi says, bread nourishes the heart of man. So if you read through Luke chapter 24, you see a lot of phrases then that just start to pop out at you. 2 men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, they did exactly what Abraham did. The men said to them, why do you seek the living one among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Resurrection prophecy fulfilled. The 3rd day rise again as you're reading that chapter. So the women go tell the male disciples, it says, but these words appeared to them as nonsense, and they wouldn't believe them. They weren't at the tent door that day. It was the women at the door that day. It says their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. They weren't ready to be Hebrews yet. They weren't completely consuming their Hebrew food yet. It says, besides all this, it is the 3rd day since these things happened. But also some women among us amazed us. When they were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. What does this encounter with the angels produce? A promise that there will be life. Return, I will return. It goes on. It says, some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women also had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish men and slow of heart to believe. You see, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. We can be walking the walk and still not see the things we need to see. We can still be too earthbound. It says, when he reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it. They're about to have some Hebrew food. And breaking it, he began giving it to them. Then their eyes were opened and recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to one another, were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining scriptures to us? It's Hebrew food. The scriptures are Hebrew food. And they realize it when he blesses the bread. It says they began to relate their experiences on the road and how he was recognized by them in the breaking of bread. So you can see Abraham did this. He recognized the angels. And this act of breaking bread is just coming down through the centuries. Yeshua takes physical food. He says, touch me and see, understand. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. He took the fish and ate it before them. He opened their minds to understand the scriptures. You can see that Yeshua is doing his best to make sure the disciples understand he is fully resurrected, that this is our expectation, and he proves it by eating the human food. Just like Abraham offers the angels the human food, and we can see this connection between the earth and the heavens. Yeshua is saying this is how you reconnect, through resurrection. And as a human being, if you want to eat human food, you can. But as a human being, you better be eating Hebrew food, because you can. You're like that tent opening. As a human being, you were created to engage two realms, physical and spiritual. You're a special kind of being. Thus it is written that Christ would suffer and rise again from the dead the third day. And then he goes on, he says, behold, I am sending forth the promise of my Father upon you. But you are to stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high. Well, power, or Gvura, is the fifth spirit listed in Isaiah, and it is chiastic to the spirit of counsel. So as the spirit of counsel works in a specific way to affect resurrection on the third day, so the spirit of power also affects resurrection on the fifth day, which corresponds to the Feast of Trumpets, by the way. And it's thought that Gabriel will be the one blowing that shofar when resurrection power calls forth the righteous. Here's one little blurb it might be a good thing to, like, for your study groups, fellowships, or whatever, if you have Midrash. I think this is a great verse right here, Mark 14, 50 through 52. As Yeshua was in the garden and they're arresting him, it says they all left him and fled. A young man, an Ar, if you put it back in Hebrew, was following him, wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body. And they seized him, but he pulled free of the linen sheet and escaped naked. That evokes all sorts of things. Again, with these young men accompanying instances of resurrection. Let's see, I think I may move this tomorrow. I know we're running late tonight. I don't want to keep you up too late, because those of you on the East Coast with me, it's getting late. What I might do is just move this over to tomorrow's lesson, because I don't think tomorrow's lesson is quite as long. So we'll stop there, and I'll make myself a note to do that.